Nothing is quite as hard as consistency, and that stands doubly true when you're expecting something to be consistently good. There have, of course, been a number of major gaming franchises over the years that have managed to do just that, and in doing so have earned themselves millions upon millions of fans. Even such franchises, however, have had their off days. Here, we're going to talk about a few gaming franchises that have generally been good with some very notable exceptions. We will, of course, also be talking about those exceptions. Metal Gear Survive. You'd think that Konami couldn't have given the Metal Gear franchise a worse send-off than it did with the troubled launch of MGS5 and the acrimonious departure of series mastermind Hideo Kojima, but the company decided to follow up on those disasters with another major screw-up. And that came in the form of Metal Gear Survive, an abomination of a survival game with mindless repetitive mechanics, uninspired design, and an unimaginable misuse of a beloved IP. Metal Gear Survive isn't mainline, of course, and as such, easily ignorable, which is good, because that's exactly what you should do with it. Resident Evil 6.
Yes, he's a mercenary, but right now he's under the protection of the US government. He's no threat to the PSAA.
Unless someone pays me to be.
What did you just say?
For a franchise that has been running as long with as many installments as Resident Evil has, there's bound to be a few dips, but few of them are as prominent or as hard to forget as Resident Evil 6. So bad was this mess of an action game, that genre being a big part of the issue, that in spite of the fact that it's a mainline entry, it has barely been acknowledged by the developer since its release. The series has, of course, completely changed course since that failure, but even with its remarkable reversal of fortunes, the RE6 flashbacks are hard to shake for longtime fans of the franchise. Mass Effect Andromeda. Many of Mass Effect Andromeda's defenders will tell you that it's actually a solid game in its own right, and that it got more hate than it deserved. There's surely some merit to the fringe acclaim that the troubled sci-fi RPG occasionally receives, but there's also no denying that when viewed in the context of the circumstances it released under, it's easy to understand why it got slammed the way it did. Those circumstances were the fact that it was following up on one of the best, most widely beloved, and most universally respected RPG trilogies of all time, which means expectations were sky high, expectations that it obviously did not live up to. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. Why Activision even bothered with this game, we're not going to be able to figure out. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was an insult to the beloved franchise in every possible way. It was a broken, technical mess, which means playing it was an exercise in patience in and of itself. But even if it had been devoid of those faults, other debilitating issues would still have dragged the experience down. It had some of the worst designed tracks in series history. A complete lack of NPCs made it feel soulless and bland, and visually it was shockingly subpar. Dead Rising 4. The game that killed not only its franchise but also the studio responsible for it, Dead Rising 4 wasn't a hot mess or anything like that, and it was certainly more enjoyable and better put together than a lot of the others on this list, but it was a far cry from what it needed to be. Key features and mechanics were removed. Several story and writing decisions left fans frustrated. A lot of frustrating design choices were made, and all around, the game just lost so much of the series' identity. Dead Rising 4 may not have been without its qualities, but it was enough of a mess to take down Dead Rising with it, and for that, we can't forgive it. Dino Crisis 3.
So we better secure the ship and search for any survivors.
Huh? What is this?
Speaking of games that killed beloved franchises before they could really hit their stride, Dino Crisis 3 was another game that did just that. The dinosaur survival horror series never really managed to get along, and that was down almost entirely to the abysmal failure of Dino Crisis 3. Afflicted with a terrible camera and messy combat, both of which seem to have been given very little thought during the actual development process, the game was a chore to play more often than not. Whether or not the developer ever brings Dino Crisis back is any anyone's guess, but back when the series died, over 2 decades ago, it was easy to see why things had panned out that way. Dino Crisis 3 was that bad. Need for Speed 2015. Sadly for the Need for Speed franchise, we could have included several potential entries in this feature. We are, however, going to go with its attempted 2015 reboot because, oh boy, what a mess that was. Visually and technically, it was a gorgeous game, there's no doubt about that. But every other way that matters, Need for Speed was a disaster.
Damn cops! Pull over!
The AI was terrible, which means the races were boring, and the game was, like some other entries in the series, also dragged down by an unbelievably annoying story and cast of characters. There was also its always-online nature, which wasn't well received by critics or the wider community to say the very least. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Sonic has had a few stinkers over the years, but the one we're going for here is the one that, frankly, you all expect us to. 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog was supposed to be the series' big, shiny reboot on paper, but the game itself turned out to be a pile of hot garbage. And that's a charitable description, if we're being honest. If you were somehow able to get past its horrific technical issues, you'd then be met with crippling issues with everything related to the controls, the camera, the level design, the cutscenes, and the writing, and so much more. When people call Sonic 06 one of the worst games ever made, they're definitely not exaggerating. Saints Row 2022.
What it is, why are you watching it now?
Well, I mean, we're about to be shot at, so I figured it couldn't hurt to brush up on our healthcare package.
If you weren't paying attention to the briefing, I don't think you'll live long enough for your copay to matter.
So I should be reviewing the life insurance policy.
The Saints Row franchise had reached a fork in the road after Saints Row 4, and rather than making another direct sequel, Volition decided to instead reboot the franchise. It was, in hindsight, a monumentally terrible decision, not least because of what it led to. The 2022 Saints Row reboot had no soul, no personality, and no sense of style or humor, all of which are criticisms that should be anathema to Saints Row. So disappointing was the reboot that following its commercial and critical disappointment, Volition ended up getting shuttered, which is a heartbreak we're not going to get over anytime soon. Ninja Gaiden 3. Another franchise-killing disaster, Ninja Gaiden 3 may very well be one of the most hated games out there for fans of character action games, especially because it followed up on what may be some of the genre's greatest offerings of all time. Like so many games in that era, Ninja Gaiden 3 bent over backwards to appeal to a broader crowd, which meant all of the mechanical complexities and notorious difficulty of its predecessors was dropped in favor of a shallow, overly streamlined action game. On top of that, Ninja Gaiden 3 was also a bit of a technical mess, which made things that much worse for longtime fans of the series. To this day, it also remains the series' last entry, which is the definition of a bummer. Duke Nukem Forever. When a game releases after 14 years of development, you expect it to at least be functional in the barest sense. But Duke Nukem Forever failed to hit even that low bar when it finally came out after its famously protracted development cycle. Even if you were able to look past its many technical issues, you'd still have to contend with its overly linear and boring level design, the simplistic and unengaging shooting, its ugly as sin visuals, and of course its painfully aged writing and sense of humor. Duke Nukem Forever was the game that proved that maybe the series was best left in the cryo chamber. Silent Hill Book of Memories. Few major gaming franchises have been through the trenches the way Silent Hill has, but never else did the horror series hit the kind of lows that it did with its PS Vita spin-off, Book of Memories. That game basically had no right to be called Silent Hill, not only because of how bad it was, but also because, well, why the hell would you call a dungeon crawler Silent Hill? Other than its admittedly solid visuals, Silent Hill Book of Memories had little else going for it. Boring gameplay, a nonsensical story, half-baked mechanics, and poorly balanced difficulty made nearly every second of the game a torturous experience. Crackdown 3. Crackdown 3 was in development for a long time, and it went through quite a few developers, but the game just never managed to coalesce. What was hyped for the longest time as a major first-party Xbox release to look forward to ultimately turned out to be a buggy, bland, utterly forgettable game. Boring missions, an empty and dead open world, and a woefully underbaked multiplayer component, which made a mockery out of the so-called power of the cloud, all came together in what was one of the biggest first-party disappointments of that generation on any console. Mega Man X6. For many, Mega Man X6 is the poster child of bad level design in a 2D side-scroller. For a series that's always prided itself on finely handcrafted levels, that's one of the gravest errors a game can make. Though the game was not without its strengths, the strong visuals and the music being among them, the actual act of playing it was the opposite of fun. The game often almost felt unnecessarily hostile in how poorly it was balanced and how frustrating so many of its design decisions were, making it the absolute lowest point of the series. Thief 2014. A reboot of a beloved immersive sim series coming from Eidos Montreal hot on the heels of the widely acclaimed Deus Ex Human Revolution, 2014's Thief reboot should have been a slam dunk, and there were surely many who expected that was exactly what it would be. It turned out to be something of a damp squib instead. From poorly designed environments and how limited gameplay often felt, Thief was dragged down by several significant issues. At the end of the day, it just completely missed the point of what fans wanted it to be. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on GamingBolt, so please consider subscribing as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.